Hi, so today I'll be talking about the MSP regime that the farmers are demanding for all the crops. Will it be beneficial both for the farmers and the country as a whole? Before actually talking about that answer, I would like to first give you a background of how MSP evolved from the time it was instituted in 1966-67. If we go back to 1965, even before the Green Revolution, there was scarcity of food grains in the country, in many states of the country. States like Bihar and many other states, which means that the demand for the food grains was higher than the supply of the food grains. During this time, the farmers got high prices because the demand outstripped the supply, so there would be a higher price in such situations. During this time, the government had to intervene because the prices of the food grains have gone up. So the government had to do something for the poor so that poor could easily access the food grains. The financial constraint should not be a problem for them. Or what the government decided was that it will procure some food grains from the farmers and it will channelize these food grains into certain shops where it would sell these food grains at a very cheap rate so that the poor can buy them and benefit from it. But also because there was scarcity of food grains, it was imperative that the production of the food grains be increased. And how can the production be increased? Encourage the farmers to produce more grains. This came about by ensuring that the farmer would definitely get a price, however low it would come to in the market. Now, why are we talking about a low price in the market? As the farmer produces more, there would come a point when the demand for the food grains would come down, but the supply will still remain as the farmer has produced more. During such a time, the price of the food grains will come down. Then the income of the farmer reduces. Now, if the farmer is guaranteed certain income despite the lowering of the prices, the farmer will feel secure, and he'll feel secure because for the extra investment that is made to produce the extra supply, even if the price he would get in the market reduces, there is a minimum income that the farmer would get. So this is the philosophy behind the minimum support price, a way to encourage the farmers to produce more food grains, at the same time ensuring the farmers against lowering of prices. And such a procurement started happening in 1966-67. Initially, the procurement price used to be lower than the market price of the food grains. And as the procurement began, it worked like this initially. Initially, the food grains were procured from the farmer. Farmer would store some of his grain so that he could sell it when the price in the market was high. A portion of this grain had to be sold to the government, but it was sold at a price which is lower than the market price. The farmers were not always willing to do that, and hence they did not favor that the government was procuring their grains, a certain portion of their grains, and rather wanted to escape from selling the grains to the government. The farmers also felt it difficult that the selling of the grain to the government was legal. The government understood that the farmers did not favor the procurement of the grains by the government. They also understood that there could be a possibility of protests because of this, in addition to some other political issues. And therefore, the government decided that it would not be from the farmers that the government would procure from then on, but it would be from the millers, the people who process the raw grain. So the millers would get the food grains from the farmers, and a certain portion of it will be bought by the government for the procurement price, which was called the minimum support price. And this price, as I told you, was lower than the market price. For example, if 1 kg of rice costed rupees 40, the government would procure it at rupees 30. Like the farmers, the millers also did not favor that the government was procuring a certain portion of the food grains from them at a lower price than the market price. The other portion of the food grains, the millers were free to sell it in the open market. But they also had to get the permission to sell that other portion in the open market from the government. And to provide these permits to the millers, there was some corruption that happened between the government departments and the millers, where the millers would have to pay some speed money. Not only are the millers being forced to sell some portion of their food grains to the government at lower price than the market price, but they're also having to pay some speed money to various people in the government department. And because of these two reasons, the millers also, like the farmers, did not favor that the government procure their grain at a price lower than the market price. So this was the scenario that was started after 1966-67, but by 2007 the minimum support price started to get higher than the market price of the food grains. The minimum support price, even though they are announced for 23 crops, but they're only given for two crops, rice and wheat. The moment the minimum support price started getting higher than the market price, the farmers were only incentivized to grow more and more of rice and wheat. And because of this, what is happening is there is surplus production of rice and wheat than what is required or demanded in the country. If the country approximately requires 150 to 160 million tons of rice and wheat, but the production of the same now is between 250 to 300 million tons. And this is way more than what is even required during emergency situations for the country. Because of such a surplus production, there is around 7 to 8 crore tons of food grains that are being unused in the government godowns even in the peak times. This is inefficient use of the resources produced by the country. And to further highlight how inefficient this use is, I would like to take the example of rice and see how the MSP mechanism works with regard to rice. So from 2007 onwards, I told you that the minimum support price was greater than the market price of the food grains. The food grains are directly procured from the farmers. There was a change that was brought about where the food grains, from being bought from the millers, it changed to being bought from the farmers. The minimum support price is higher than the market price of rice. So let us assume minimum support price of rice, or the MSP of the rice, is 50 rupees per kg. When the government procures this rice from the farmers, it procures it at 50 rupees per kg. And after this, as I told you, when there was food scarcity in 1965, from 1966-67 onwards, it was ensured that this rice was channeled to be sold at lower prices at distribution centers, which are called fair price shops, as a part of public distribution system. Here, it was sold to the seller at around 1 or 2 rupees per kg. So the seller would buy this rice at 1 or 2 rupees per kg, but the rice he would get would not have demand from the people. People want to eat something else because there is surplus rice that is produced. And I talked about the figures of the surplus with regard to both rice and wheat. So what is happening is the seller who had bought from the government at 1 or 2 rupees per kg of rice is selling it to the miller at, let us say, 20 rupees per kg. So that seller is approximately making 18 to 19 rupees profit out of this. Let us say 18 rupees. The miller, on finding that there is not much of demand for rice in the open market, again sells it back to the government, to the Food Corporation of India at 50 rupees. This way, the miller had made a profit of 32 rupees. He bought it for 18 rupees and now he's selling it for 50 rupees. And 50 rupees per kg is the amount at which the government had initially bought the rice from the farmer. In the first stage, the government had bought the rice from the farmer at 50 rupees per kg, and in the last stage, the government is again buying the rice at 50 rupees per kg. This way, the rice is circulating between the seller at the PDS, the millers, and the government. The price with which the government initially bought the rice from the farmer, the minimum support price, is the taxpayers' money. And this taxpayers' money is not put to good use. So there is inefficient use of taxpayers' money. The farmers are encouraged to produce rice and wheat because the minimum support price is higher than the market price. The farmers are producing too much of rice and wheat without there being a demand for them. So the government is encouraging the farmers to produce those items which have a reduced demand in the market, and the surplus which is not sold in the market is getting circulated between the government and the middlemen in the supply chain. Because of this meaningless and endless circulation of grains between the players who are not actually consuming it is causing a loss to the government treasury. And how much is that loss? It is 2 lakh crore rupees per year. And even if the farmer is getting a price through the MSP, he is not increasing his income. He would get that fixed price, but there won't be an increase in the income of the farmers. And this is important because the agricultural sector has an income of only 15% of the GDP, but there is 45% of the population of 1.41 crore which is dependent on agriculture. So farmers are poor. It is important that there is an increase in the income of the farmers. With the present MSP regime, so far for the last 40 years or so, the farmers are still living in poverty. On one hand, there is a huge loss to the state treasury of 2 lakh crore rupees per year, and on another, the farmers are not able to realize a rise in their incomes. And now one would argue that why not procure other crops from the farmers for which the MSP is announced in paper. But the problem with this questioning is, with already a loss to the state treasury of 2 lakh crore rupees per year, how is the government going to get finance to be able to buy all the crops through a minimum support price? Let me tell you one thing. The figures of the latest budget say that the government has an income of around 42 lakh crores. That is the income it received from the taxpayers. Out of this 42 lakh crores, 22.74 crores is distributed to the states in the form of grants, centrally sponsored schemes, and other means. Out of the remaining 12.91 lakh crores are interest payments on the loans taken by the government. 7.68 lakh crores are payments in the form of salaries and pensions to the government employees. And if you add up 22.7, 12.91 and 7.68, it is more than 42 lakh crores, the income that the government receives as the taxpayers' money. So the entire income of the government is already consumed, but the government has other works to do despite the fact that the income is consumed. Like it has expenses in the form of capital expenditure, building roads, buildings, hospitals, and for education, schools. And there are also some subsidies that the government gives to the farmers, like the fertilizer subsidy. For carrying out all these expenses, the government borrows. The government borrows from the banks, that is, the depositors' money. After carrying out all these expenses, the government should then look into procuring all the crops from the farmers through the MSP system. And this has been estimated to be in between 10 lakh crores or 17 lakh crores through some estimates. Now the question is, when the government is already short in finances, when the government is already borrowing from the banks, how much is the government willing to borrow further? So should it be the right step for the government to move forward? And should it be the step that the government should take? Providing MSP for all the crops, is it a practical step? If after giving the MSP, if the farmers are able to improve their incomes, if the farmers are able to generate more wealth in the agricultural sector, that would be a good decision. But that is not the case. So far, for the crops that the government has given MSP for, the farmers are still living in poverty. The MSP regime for all the crops would provide a secure income for the farmers, but it won't raise the income of the farmers. With the example of the provision of the MSP for rice, I've shown you how the financial resources of the government are inefficiently used. There are other ways to raise the income of the farmers, at the same time ensuring that there is no loss to the state treasury. One way to do it is to give some freedom for the farmer to sell his produce at any place he wants, be it outside the state or outside the country. And how this really works, let me explain. So let me take an example. In 2011, in the state of Andhra Pradesh, which also had Telangana at that time, certain regions in Andhra, present day Andhra, as well as Telangana, produced a kind of rice called BPT. and these regions could efficiently produce this kind of rice, and hence it could produce more as well as sell it cheaply in the market. The supply of this BPT rice had outstripped the demand of the rice in Andhra Pradesh, the undivided Andhra Pradesh. At that time, the cost of one bag of BPT rice was 750 rupees, and one bag weighed 74 kgs. But the same BPT rice, which was produced in the neighboring states of Karnataka and Maharashtra, not as productively as it was done in Telangana and parts of Andhra, costed more. It costed 1200 rupees for a bag. So what I want to point out here is the farmers of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh were not allowed to sell their rice in the neighboring states of Karnataka and Maharashtra by the imposition of a law by the state government of the undivided Andhra at that time. So they had to sell it at 750 rupees, which was the price in Andhra Pradesh. If they were allowed to sell it in Karnataka, they would have got a better price for their produce. They would have got 1200 rupees for a bag of rice. So what happened was there was a protest, and this protest involved carrying the rice from Andhra to Karnataka and Maharashtra and selling certain amounts of rice there, and the people there also bought it. Seeing this protest and seeing the fact that the law of Andhra Pradesh was violated and nothing the government could do about this, many other farmers of Andhra Pradesh became fearless and also started selling their produce for rupees 1200 per kg in the state of Maharashtra and Karnataka. And once this happened, within 10 days, the price of the BPT rice in the neighboring states as well as Andhra equalized. The price of the BPT rice in Andhra became rupees 1200 per bag, and the farmers there did not have to go to the neighboring states of Karnataka and Maharashtra to sell their rice. They could get higher prices for their rice in Andhra itself, which was formerly rupees 750 per bag. So what really happened was, when the supply outstripped the demand in Andhra Pradesh, the price of rice was low. But as soon as the rice was sold in the neighboring states, the supply reduced and the demand outstripped the supply, and then the price of the rice rose to 1200 rupees per bag. In effect, the law that was in place at that time, which did not allow the farmers of Andhra to sell their rice to Karnataka and Maharashtra, the neighboring states, was the Essential Commodities Act. So the government could do a lot to increase the income of the farmers. And I must tell you one thing, because the farmers were able to sell it outside Andhra, the farmers at that time for that year could generate an additional 3,600 crore rupees. Isn't that a raise in the income of the farmers? Definitely. Similarly, in the same year, when the price of rice in the market abroad, not within India, market abroad, was good and high, a ban on the export of the rice was lifted. The farmers were able to sell their produce outside the country and get high prices for their produce. So what I want to explain through these examples is that the ways of the government should be aligned in such a way that the farmer is able to realize a good price for his produce. It is not only imperative that the farmer get the freedom to sell his produce where he wants. Sometimes the farmer should also be given protection to sell his produce. In this case, let me take an example of import of edible oil. There is a high demand for edible oil in the country, and the supply does not keep up with it, and hence there is a need to import edible oil into the country. But when you compare that with the import of crude oil, which ultimately is refined and used in cars and vehicles, the production of edible refined oil in the country is considerable. There are 2 crore 70 lakh farmers who are producing oil seeds in the country. And for crude oil, there are relaxed tariffs. It is imperative that India imposes low tariffs on the import of crude oil because there are not much of resources in the country. But when it comes to edible oil or the palmolene oil, there are 2 crore 70 lakh farmers who are dependent on it. And it is important to protect these farmers. If the imports on the edible oil were low, the oil from abroad would be cheaper. The farmers who are producing it at a much higher price would not be able to stand the competition from the one that is coming from abroad. Hence, it would be a loss to the farmers, and some of them could eventually stop producing the oil seeds. In such cases, it is important that the farmers' interests be protected by increasing the tariff or the import of the cheap edible oil. And that's what precisely the central government had done in 2007. There was a reasonable increase in the tariff of the edible oil to 35 to 40%. Low tariffs are between 0 to 5%. And because of this, the farmers who produced the oil seeds, the palm oil seeds, benefited because of the high price they got in the markets, as opposed to when the tariff on the imports was low and they could not compete with the cheap imports from abroad. So it is not only important to allow the farmers some freedom to sell his produce wherever he wants, be it inside the country or outside the country, but he should also be given appropriate tariff protection at appropriate times. And this is where the government comes in once again. To further illustrate what happens when the government meddles in the tariffs for the imports, with the start of the Ukraine war, the government had again imposed tariffs on the palmolene oil. The government reduced the tariffs on the imports of the edible oil or the cooking oil, and in the state of Andhra Pradesh, the price of 1 kg of oil seeds, the palm oil seeds, reduced from 23 rupees to 13 rupees. So this way the income of the farmers has reduced and it has affected the farmer. The export ban of rice, which I talked about, which was lifted in 2011, was also reimposed after the start of the Ukraine war. This also is a step which is temporary. At some point it should be lifted again, but in that temporary period there is a loss to the income of the farmers. So all these examples are to illustrate the point that the government through their ways can increase or decrease the income of the farmers. Are there some other ways in which the government could be involved and increase the income of the farmers? Definitely, there are many ways. And one way is to increase the storage facilities in the country. Not more than 10% of agricultural items have storage facilities in the country. And I tell you storage facilities because, once again, let me take another example. There is always a frenzy whenever one hears the news of the rise in the prices of onions or tomatoes. So onions and tomatoes and such like vegetables are perishable goods. This rise in price has occurred because the supply had outstripped the demand for these vegetables. So as soon as the price rises, the demand for these vegetables come down, but the farmers reacting to this in a certain way. With the perishable supply, which would get spoiled, for which they have invested, would not get a price if they won't sell this in the market, and hence they start selling it at low prices, and then the demand increases once again. This way the farmer is not able to get enough income because the prices have come down. So you can see that there is a fluctuation in the price. Initially, when the supply outstripped the demand, the price was high. Seeing this, the demand reduced, and seeing this, the farmers reduced the prices to sell their perishable vegetables like the tomatoes or onions. In many other modern countries, you don't see such drastic fluctuation in the prices. Have you ever wondered why? It is because they have proper processing and storage facilities. In India, as I told you, not more than 10% of the items have proper storage facilities. And why I tell you this is, if there are good storage facilities and processing facilities, the tomatoes and onions can be converted to different products. Like for example, the tomato can be changed into a ketchup. The processor can buy the tomatoes from the farmer and process it, and when the demand for the processed good increases, he can sell it in the market. Meanwhile, the processor can ensure a good price for the farmer. Price that the farmer gets from the processor would be higher than the one when the farmer sells, seeing that the demand for the tomatoes had reduced. That is when he resorts to a distress sale. He has no other option but to sell at low prices. If this is the solution for perishable goods, there is a solution for imperishable goods also. Imperishable goods like cotton, turmeric, chilies. If there are some good storage facilities for these items, once again in the market, when the supply outstrips the demand, the farmer need not resort to a distress sale. if provisions are made to build storage facilities, these imperishable goods like cotton, turmeric, and chilies can be stored in these facilities. But how is the farmer going to get income from these facilities for the intervening period? When the demand outstrips the supply, the farmer would get a higher price. In the meanwhile, in the time when the demand had not risen, the farmer could also get some finance through a certain method. Imagine that meanwhile, the bank gives a loan to the farmer at a low interest rate on the guarantee of the produce the farmer had stored in the storage facility. The farmer can then use these loans to satisfy his immediate needs like food, education, and health of his family, and also for investing in agriculture for the coming year, and to be able to store his produce in the storage facility. He can be provided with the storage facility at low rents. So in the case of banks, he can be provided with a low interest loan. In the case of storage facilities, he can be provided with a low rent. And as soon as the demand increases for these imperishable goods, which does happen in a time of 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and these goods like the cotton, turmeric, and chilies can be sold in the market, then the demand would outstrip the supply. The farmer would get a good price for it. He can use that price to pay back his low interest loans as well as his low rent. And if something is left out, he can keep for himself. And this is another way to ensure a stable income for the farmer. Not only this, there are more ways to increase the income of the farmers. Entrepreneurs can be encouraged to take loans from the bank and provide investment to the farmer for a better yield, for better productivity, for a better grading, sorting, and processing of the grains. They can, if possible, even make it conducive for the export of the produce. There are certain restrictions to the export because of the hygiene and the cleanliness of the produce. Such things can be taken care of the entrepreneur. So these are some ways to improve the income of the farmers, to be able to improve the storage facilities, and to give freedom to the farmers to sell his produce wherever he wants, and to give protection to the farmers at some times by imposing tariff to the import of produce. On the top of this, entrepreneurship in agriculture can also be encouraged, but the problem is, where is the credit for entrepreneurship going to come from? The loans that the farmers are taking to be able to invest in the agriculture, to be able to provide for their health, education of their family, are being waived off. The banks are losing money and they're reluctant to lend because of this lack of finance. So it is important that reckless lending of the banks authorized by the government be stopped, both at the center and the state level, wherever it is. Farmers' welfare is important. They have to be provided with loans. They have to be provided with loan waivers, but not to the extent that the farmer thinks that every time he takes a loan, he would be given a loan waiver. And what is happening because of this is that the banks are not having enough finance to lend to the entrepreneurs. So these are the ways in which the income of the farmers could be raised and the loss to the exchequer of the government could be reduced because of this. The government should not spend to provide MSP. It should spend in such a way that there is a return to what is being spent. The way to do that is to improve the income of the farmers, the methods that I told you right now.